The events begin with a TV announcer declaring that the government, during its annual conference, announced that the economy has been continuously growing since the end of the Great War, but there has been an increase in crimes. Meanwhile, the protagonist, Inui, receives a phone call and immediately leaves his office. Later, Inui throws two men out of a bar and tells them not to come back. Inui remarks that two things have changed the city since the end of the Great War. The first is the expansion of the Baryorn Company due to the military purchasing boom during the war, and the second is the emergence of expanded individuals enhanced by Baryorn. The bar owner appears, and when she tries to touch Inui's head from behind, he stops her, explaining he doesn't want to raise a hand against his client. The woman mentions a rumor about a trigger on his head being his weak point, which Inui confirms, stating no one will touch his trigger. She comments that he seems to be looking for someone to trust with his trigger. Inui tells her to stop joking and warns her to choose her customers carefully to avoid trouble. The woman mentions people suffering after the war and her inability to ignore drug dealing in her bar. She offers Inui payment and a drink, but he declines, saying his cigar is enough. He advises her to keep her money for treatment, and she hugs him from behind, thanking him but warning him not to misunderstand. Inui continues walking, dismissing her actions as foolish. As Inui walks through the streets, a vendor calls out to him, offering high-quality goods, but Inui keeps moving. The narrative shifts to Inui making a living by handling problems caused by the expanded and spending time with runaway children and mediating disputes between rival gangs. People discuss the kidnapping of a child by a rogue, expanded, and a chase ensues. A man comments that the war ended but things haven't improved, and Inui agrees. A woman notices Inui and feels intimidated by his firearm-laden appearance, but someone reassures her he's Inui, the analyst. Inui spots a nun, Karen, talking to the police about the missing child. Later, Inui returns to his office, and Christina, the owner, mentions hearing a loud noise from his office and worries about his head gun exploding. Inui rushes to his office, stating he barely affords the rent. An expanded individual appears behind Inui, who asks if he was the one causing the disturbance and kidnapping the child. The expanded denies involvement, and Inui threatens to call security. The expanded admits he's on the run, fearing recapture. Security suddenly knocks on the door, demanding entry and stating they know the expanded is inside. Inui refuses, claiming he's renovating the room and can't receive visitors. Security warns that the expanded kidnapped a child from an orphanage and is being pursued. The expanded is licensed by the Reconstruction Administration, but risks losing his license if investigations are obstructed, as it would violate the expansion law. Inui acknowledges the seriousness but suggests lesser laws can be bent. Security leaves, warning they'll search other places and mentioning Baryorn's involvement. The expanded asks Inui to protect the child and take him to a safe place, offering future payment. Inui agrees, needing his window fixed. The expanded thanks him and leaves, pursued by security. Inui contacts engineer Miyari to prepare the usual place to hide someone. Inui carries the child and leaves, but Karen intercepts him. Karen reveals she runs the orphanage and demands the child, explaining God led her there to reclaim him. Inui questions her journey alone and her rashness, given the rogue expanded. Karen removes her habit, revealing a Baryorn emblem, and threatens to kill Inui if he doesn't hand over the child. Inui hides behind a wall as Karen fires at him, commenting on her skill. Karen mocks Inui's inability to shoot back and calls him useless. She promises a painless death as an apology but is interrupted by the expanded attacking her from behind. Inui grabs the child and runs, but Karen shoots the expanded, who nearly falls but is caught by Inui. Karen threatens to kill Inui if he doesn't surrender the child. Inui sets the child down, promising to retrieve him, but Karen shoots him, causing him to fall from the building, clutching the expanded's hand. Karen takes the child, and Inui later wakes up, wet and worried about rusting. He finds the expanded injured and questions him. The expanded explains that Karen belongs to a facility that imprisons orphans for Baryorn's experiments. The child, Tetsuro, is connected to this facility, and Karen seeks him for Baryorn. Inui remains skeptical but believes the story due to the expanded's condition. The expanded, Tetsuro, explains that Baryorn implanted a device called a linsijam, allowing control over expanded individuals. He escaped but lost his vocal cords and had his leg strings cut. Inui dislikes children but agrees to help, encountering Karen on a train. The story concludes with Inui confronting Karen, who remains determined to fulfill her mission. Then, Inuyashiki directed his fist at the train, stopping it with his extraordinary strength. Someone then told Karen that they had been attacked by a deranged expander. Karen's armed men surrounded Inuyashiki and opened fire on him. Inuyashiki countered the attack, striking everyone in his path with his powerful fist, saying they were overreacting to an unarmed man. Someone suggested Karen ask for backup from headquarters, but she refused, saying she wouldn't do something so humiliating. Meanwhile, Inuyashiki tore through the door and entered Karen's place, saying he had come to reclaim the child she had borrowed from him. Karen apologized but told him she would eliminate him, because her mission was to return that child to the facility. Karen then aimed her gun at Inuyashiki, who approached her, saying he hated children, especially obedient ones. Inuyashiki then directed his words at Tetsuro, who was unconscious, asking if he had told him he only wanted to walk freely and not become a tool for Baryorn's experiments. He ordered Tetsuro to let go of his anger and not give up so easily. At that moment, Tetsuro woke up and told Karen that the harmony system had activated. Tetsuro then released a wave of light from his mouth, controlling one of Karen's followers and asking Inuyashiki to save him. Karen was astonished, while Inuyashiki proudly said, "That's how kids should be." Karen became furious and aimed her gun at Inuyashiki, asking, "How about a shot from this distance?" Inuyashiki dodged the bullet and blocked it with his hand, saying he would fulfill Tetsuro's wish. He then quickly knocked Karen unconscious and freed Tetsuro, saying he had completed his promised task. Later, Inuyashiki called Mayari again from a tobacco shop and told her he would be late, but would come now with the person he wanted to hide. Inuyashiki then hung up, asked the shopkeeper for Tanegashima cigarettes, and soon lit one, saying his tolerance for headaches had greatly increased, and he could no longer move. He looked at his hand, saying he had been hit by a lot of bullets while trying to show off. He then looked at Tetsuro, who he had placed on the stairs, and said he had saved him but didn't know what to do with him. Meanwhile, the news announced that a Periorn train had derailed that morning due to an attack by the anti-expander terrorist group Spetsbjerg, and that the incident was likely covered up by Periorn to hide the child's existence. When Inuyashiki heard this, he carried Tetsuro on his shoulder, saying Periorn must be hiding the truth. The news also mentioned that Spetsbjerg terrorists were suspected of kidnapping Tetsuro, the eldest son of Periorn's executive chairman, Arahaba Kichiro. No one had seen Tetsuro since his sudden disappearance a year ago, and the reconstruction agency announced it would help Periorn search for him. Somewhere else, a man looked at his daughter, who was randomly moving on a table. He said he had made her undergo illegal expansion to make some money, but her expansion had been assembled unnaturally, ignoring compatibility, causing the experiment to fail. Mayari said at that moment that if the girl continued moving involuntarily like that, her subordinate brain would be strained, affecting her real brain as well. The girl's father said that was impossible, and Mayari asked him why he was still there, telling him men should stay outside. The man said he had paid a lot for his daughter's treatment, and Mayari asked what treatment he was talking about, since she had just dismantled his daughter to remove the damaged parts and keep her alive. The man ran to hug his daughter, who repeated, "Daddy." Mayari told him to come to her next time he needed expansion and promised to install high-quality parts for less than what the mafia would charge. The man left, and Mayari asked Inuyashiki to show himself. Inuyashiki appeared, placing Tetsuro on the table. Mayari asked if he wanted to hide the child, and she said she didn't mind hiding him, adding that Periorn would think twice before entering the Kyosu slum filled with immigrants. More importantly, she was interested in Tetsuro's new illegal expansion, called Harmony. Inuyashiki said the expansion was called Harmony, and Mayari explained that it was originally developed to strengthen soldiers during the war. The subordinate brain was created to support the functions of enhanced humans and reduce the burden on the human brain. This allowed the expander to move expanded parts following pre-programmed movement patterns without complex commands. Inuyashiki wondered how he could disable the Harmony system, and Mayari said older expander models like his were hard to target because their subordinate brains were internal. She guessed that the Harmony system likely forced another expander into the driver's seat by force, and confirmed that Periorn would likely think twice before entering the slum. Mayari explained that the Harmony system was probably developed to take control of another expander's subordinate brain. Inuyashiki asked how they could disable it, and Mayari said she needed 3 keys: the user, the manufacturer, and emergency medical services. She also mentioned a rumored master key that could override them. Mayari wondered why Periorn would create a system that could destroy them from the start. Inuyashiki asked if they could remove the Harmony system, and Mayari said it was implanted near Tetsuro's spinal cord, so forced removal could cause severe damage. It seemed the people who implanted it didn't care if he lived or died, perhaps because he was an orphan. Inuyashiki exhaled his cigarette and said, "Who knows?" Mayari asked him in surprise if he had changed his cigarette brand, and he said he had to because he couldn't get his favorite ones. Mayari then gathered her things and said he had left some Tanegashima cigarettes with her last time, but after Inuyashiki got excited, she tapped him on the head, saying she had probably thrown them away because she didn't smoke, and if she kept such foul-smelling cigarettes, her patients would complain. Mayari said she could expand Tetsuro's vocal cords and limbs to support him in daily life, but needed to wait until he woke up. Inuyashiki left, asking her to call his office when Tetsuro awoke. Mayari asked if he had already completed his mission and why he wasn't reacting to the child, wondering if he wanted the boy as a partner. Inuyashiki left, saying he was counting on her. Later, Inuyashiki stood in the middle of the street, smoking, but he was annoyed because the cigarettes didn't satisfy him like his favorites. He spotted a vending machine with his favorite cigarettes, got excited, and tried to take them, but 2 security guards took the cigarettes and escorted him to a man who thanked them and sent them away. The man told Inuyashiki he knew he was a deranged expander created by the military during the Great War. The man told Inuyashiki everything he knew about him and finally asked how he could fix his broken window since he hadn't been paid for his last job. Inuyashiki asked the man who Tetsuro was, and the man replied that Tetsuro was a Periorn representative named Canningham, who had come to reclaim him since they were his legal owners. Canningham asked Inuyashiki to resolve things peacefully in exchange for adequate compensation. Canningham then offered Inuyashiki a pack of Tanegashima cigarettes and said that if subordinate brains were continuously stressed, they would affect the real brain. He explained that Tanegashima cigarettes were one form of medication for expanders. Canningham then ordered his men to tie Inuyashiki up. While his men bound Inuyashiki, Canningham placed the cigarettes in front of him and began stomping on them, threatening to destroy everything Inuyashiki loved if he rejected the offer. Inuyashiki asked Canningham why they were treating Tetsuro, the only son of Periorn's executive chairman, Arahaba Kichiro, like a lab pig. Canningham said that all employees, even Tetsuro, were just cogs in the company, and their job was to complete their tasks as he had done in the past. Canningham hurried Inuyashiki to make a decision about the offer, saying he wanted to go home early and have dinner with his family. Suddenly, Inuyashiki regained his strength, tore through Cunningham's legs, and revealed sharp tools on his back. Cunningham was stunned, and Inuyashiki told him he smoked those cigarettes because he liked them, not because they enabled him to move, and Tetsuro had said he wasn't a tool, so they shouldn't be looking for him. Inuyashiki then took off his clothes, threatening that he unfortunately couldn't control his body anymore. After a while, Cunningham stood alone after Inuyashiki defeated all his men. Inuyashiki offered Cunningham the chance to return to Periorn instead of being torn apart. Cunningham picked up the cigarette box and left, telling Inuyashiki to be careful because Periorn would now be after him. Inuyashiki asked Cunningham to at least leave one pack, and Cunningham agreed. Miyari then appeared from behind and told Inuyashiki he seemed to be in trouble. Inuyashiki later smoked Mayari's cigarettes, which replicated the active ingredients of Tanegashima cigarettes, but he said they tasted terrible. Mayari said she didn't know the taste of cigarettes and asked Inuyashiki why he was asking her. Inuyashiki asked about her face mask, and she said she was in disguise because she didn't want to get involved with him. She had come to him when she called his office and he didn't answer, guessing he might be suffering from withdrawal symptoms. After Miwari explained the situation to Tetsuro, he mentioned that she had performed a simple external expansion but assured him he would get used to it over time. She also apologized for not being able to help with his vocal cords, explaining that the harmony device interfered with them. Tetsuro listened quietly, trying to feed himself, but dropped his fork. This reminded him of when followers of the Periorn Company cornered him during his escape, and he bowed his head in sorrow. Miwari picked up the fork and asked him to open his mouth so she could feed him, teasingly asking if he felt happy that such a beautiful girl was feeding him. Inoue scolded her and told her not to disturb Tetsuro. Inoue then placed an expander in front of Tetsuro and explained some things to him while they ate. Meanwhile, the Huan brothers from the Kyosei group knocked on the door and said they knew Inoue was inside. Miwari advised Inoue to open the door quickly, and he did. One of the brothers commented that Inoue's expander was indeed a gun, and the other brother mentioned that there were many expanders like Inoue. Inu asked what they wanted, and one of them explained that Kyosei had been attacked recently, with children being targeted. The perpetrator didn't kill anyone but removed their arms and legs, leaving the children unconscious and unable to explain what happened. The man showed Inoue some photos, explaining that the perpetrator was hanging the body parts of expanders in public places, tied with threads like puppets. He suspected the attackers were from the Spitsbergen group. He added that the attacks were likely aimed at controlling the black market for expanders, as the attackers were enemies of expansion technology. The man continued, admitting he couldn't ignore the violation of his territory but felt ashamed to admit he had lost his men to the perpetrator. He didn't know who the attacker was, but asked Inoue to find and eliminate them. Inoue agreed. The man also offered to settle things with Periorn, as he had heard about their conflict. Inoue ignored the offer and said he would deal with the problem, adding that they should protect their own territory. He offered them coffee, saying the prices had risen, but he could afford it. One of the brothers pointed a gun at Inoue, saying they wouldn't tolerate being mocked. The other brother calmed him down. The man then leaned close to Inoue, saying there was no point in staring at a man who couldn't even see. He turned to Inoue and said that if they couldn't protect their own territory, they had no right to act superior to outsiders. He also mentioned that he didn't want to cause trouble because Miwari had always been helpful to them. Miwari listened to the conversation from behind the door. After the Wan brothers left, Miwari asked Inoue why he had refused their help. Inoue explained that the attacks weren't by Spitsbergen but were a message from Periorn, who was targeting the children to find Tetsuro. Miwari called it impossible, but Tetsuro suddenly fell out of bed. Miwari rushed to him, saying it was too soon for him to walk. Tetsuro used the expander's skull and said he couldn't let the other children be attacked because of him. Miwari supported him, understanding his feelings but pointing out how exhausting it was to deal with Periorn. Miwari then asked Inoue what he would do about his own involvement with them. Inoue said he didn't want to ask Tetsuro to fight Periorn, since Tetsuro couldn't even move without help. Miwari scolded Inoue for this. Tetsuro said Inoue was right because he couldn't even stand on his own, but that didn't mean he didn't have the right to pursue his wishes. Tetsuro recounted how he had only focused on protecting himself while escaping from the facility and hadn't tried to save his fellow prisoners. Miwari asked where the facility was, and Tetsuro said he only remembered running through dark corridors while being chased. He added that Periorn had been kidnapping people for experiments, and that it was his duty to stop their evil as the son of Periorn's CEO. He continued, saying that if he tried to go to the security office or the press, Periorn would erase his existence, but he had to prevent more harm to others. Inoue agreed to protect Tetsuro until he could walk on his own but asked for compensation since he wasn't running a charity. Tetsuro thought aloud that the harmony device could be sold for a large sum if they could remove it. Miwari explained that the device was integrated with Tetsuro's spinal cord, making it difficult to remove. Inoue then told Tetsuro that the world wasn't fair and advised him to focus on himself first rather than the other children. Inoue then went to the living room to drink coffee but suddenly lost control of his body due to Tetsuro's influence. He collapsed in front of Tetsuro's room, and Miwari asked if he was okay. He told her it was because of Tetsuro. Inoue then picked up Tetsuro and left, saying that Miwari had already had enough trouble. Miwari commented that this was what the harmony device did. In the street, Inoue put Tetsuro's body in a bag and carried it on his back, saying he felt like he was stealing, but it was for the safety of the other children. He also thought that if Tetsuro had stayed with Miwari, she might have forced him to disconnect, discovering his situation, especially since his body became defenseless when controlling another expander. Inoue then went to a specific location, now fully controlled by Tetsuro. There, he met a man who didn't believe Inoue was from the security office because of his expander. The man talked about how children were being targeted in that area and told Inoue that his younger sister had chased an edible bird 10 years ago but never came back. The man then pulled out an electric drill and asked Inoue if he minded taking a look at his parts. Suddenly, Inoue realized he was surrounded by many men from behind. He ran to the street, and everyone chased him. Inoue soon hid somewhere, but the men continued to hunt him, splitting into groups to find him. Inoue, still controlled by Tetsuro, said that Inoue's body had many channels but that he couldn't control it well because Inoue's secondary brain was different from the standard versions. Tetsuro then hid Inoue's expander and began walking through the street in disguise. He heard two girls running away from a man who was chasing them. One of the girls was named Indy, and the other was Anne. Tetsuro intervened, using Inoue's large body to block the man. Tetsuro asked the man if he was a terrorist from Spitsbergen and told him to stop chasing the girls. The man jumped up with his swords, ready to attack Tetsuro. Tetsuro acted quickly and blocked the man's attack, leaving him hanging from the ceiling. Meanwhile, Anne told Indy that they had been told her body would return to normal if they completed their mission, so they had to kill any witnesses. Indy told Anne she was right, and Indy suddenly transformed into a giant spider, rising into the air and saying they didn't need adults anymore. Tetsuro asked if they were responsible for attacking the children, but quickly realized they were Pyrrhorn's expanders who had been experimented on. Anne asked in surprise how he knew and who he was. Tetsuro explained that he had been a prisoner in that facility but escaped with someone's help and would now save them. Anne said she didn't know why he had killed the Kyosei expander but that they weren't prisoners. The facility was their only home. However, she said she had to kill him now that he had seen them. Anne ordered Indy to eliminate Tetsuro. Anne shot Tetsuro, and he began to run. The bullets hit Inoue's body, causing him to collapse. Tetsuro said he had lost control of Inoue's body because of the shots. Meanwhile, Indy became erratic and crashed into a restaurant wall. People ran in fear, shouting about a rampaging expander. Anne ran to control Indy, saying that if they could bring Tetsuro back to the facility, they would be taken care of and wouldn't suffer again. Indy returned to her human form, and Anne supported her until they met Canningham. Anne told him that Indy had reached her limit and needed treatment. Canningham reminded her that their mission was to control Indy's rampage and attack the children to force Tetsuro to return to the facility. Anne said they had left the messages as instructed, but Canningham ordered his men to get rid of Anne and Indy, saying the company didn't need unreliable tools. Just then, Inoue appeared and said that the two girls were not tools for anyone. Anne wanted to translate the following text into English in a simple and easy to understand style, without using a dialogue style, and considering the presence of complete events that she had previously summarized for the translator. Here is the translation. When Anne saw Inoue cutting off the path of the Pyrrhorn company men, she asked him in astonishment if he had been affected by Indy's poison. Inoue replied that he had been affected, but it seems that his body was somewhat resistant to the poison. However, he still felt some numbness. Cunningham then said, "A Kyoshi expander." Anne asked if they had realized they were in a complicated situation. Cunningham ordered his men to strike Inoue, and Inoue's subordinate punched him in the face, tearing the mask Inoue was wearing. Cunningham was shocked and sarcastically repeated, "Inoue." Inoue's subordinate lifted him with one hand, and Cunningham mocked, saying, "It seems Anne and Indy were useful in an unexpected way." Cunningham then ordered his man to release Indy, and the man did so. Anne rushed to her, while Cunningham told them they had one last chance to live in the condition that they fight Inoue. He asked them to prove their worth in fighting Inoue, and the company would welcome them back. Indy emotionally said that if Anne used her power again before receiving treatment, she would. Before Indy could finish, Anne interrupted her, stood up suddenly, and said she was fine, that her arms would hold her together. Indy quickly gathered her strength and transformed into a spider, surrounding Tetsuro, who was still controlling Inoue's body. Tetsuro pleaded with her to stop, assuring her that both she and Anne were being exploited, and that he knew they didn't want to do this. Anne angrily told him to shut up, saying they had always done everything together. Soon, one of Indy's spider legs pierced Inoue's body, lifting him up. His backpack, which contained Tetsuro's body, fell, and Tetsuro landed on the ground. Cunningham exclaimed in shock, "Tetsuro," and said unbelievably, "It's impossible that the one inside Inoue now is Tetsuro." He wondered if Tetsuro was controlling Inoue using the harmony system, but said it was entirely unexpected. Tetsuro, he said, had neutralized Pyrrhorn's greatest nuisance but was also their only protector. Cunningham then mocked, "A foolish child using the harmony power to hang himself." Meanwhile, Tetsuro, injured, told himself he had been too arrogant to think controlling Inoue's strong body would make him powerful. It was just an empty dream, as Inoue had told him. Still, he wanted to save the two girls, as this was the only way to prove he wasn't just a tool. Cunningham sarcastically said that one of his gun unit members had turned into garbage because of the child inside him, referring to Inoue. He ordered Indy and Anne to capture Tetsuro. Anne approached Tetsuro, thinking to herself that she was doing this only to survive and hoping Tetsuro wouldn't take it personally. She continued, saying that being tools meant they had no free will, so she asked Indy to hurry up and eliminate eliminate Tetsuro, or they would be killed. Indy said she was lost and asked Anne to hold her hands. Anne then remembered Indy had once told her that these arms and body weren't hers and asked where her real body was. Anne replied that Sister Karen had said children should hold hands so they wouldn't get lost. Anne then gripped one of Indy's spider legs and said she would always hold on so Indy wouldn't get lost. At that moment, Anne was about to grab Indy's hand, but Cunningham injected Indy with a drug, and she collapsed. Cunningham said he had spared them before, given them a second chance, but they had disappointed him. He told Anne, who was worried about Indy, that the drug would put Indy's mind into a coma, erasing her self-awareness. She would then act as the criminal responsible for the attacks on children, and her secondary brain would dissolve, preventing the Kyoshi group from stopping her. He and his followers would then intervene to solve the problem, and the Kyoshi group would owe them. At that moment, the injured Tetsuro, speaking through Inui's body, told Cunningham, "Isn't it enough that he has him?" Cunningham replied that he had told the owner of that body before that he would take away everything precious to him, one by one. He was determined to strip Inui of any escape he had after mocking him, as that was his goal. He then told Tetsuro he expected them to be thrown out of the Kyoshi cliff after causing trouble. He would then catch them, after enjoying the sight of their incredible efforts from the sidelines. Cunningham left, and Indy asked Anne to hold her hand. Tetsuro, using Inui's body, quickly threw himself at Anne before Indy could push her toward the wall, breaking it. Inui's body also hit the wall, freeing his mind from Tetsuro's control. Tetsuro regained consciousness in his own body, saying he couldn't control Inui as he should. Meanwhile, Indy transformed into a more aggressive form. Tetsuro thought to himself that he had to stop her somehow. Anne told him in that moment that he was pathetic because his secondary brain would burn out if he kept controlling Inui's gunhead. Since she was hurt and bleeding from hitting the wall, she asked Tetsuro to save Indy instead of her. She apologized for letting go of Indy's hand. Tetsuro gathered his strength, stood up, and opened his mouth to activate the harmony system and control Indy's body. He said it was the only way to save her. However, he failed to take full control of her body and decided to control one leg and destroy her secondary brain. He succeeded in controlling her leg and struck her secondary brain, but his strength failed him, and he fell to the ground before he could finish. At that moment, Inui returned to his senses and grabbed Indy's legs, telling Tetsuro, "You saw me well from the passenger seat." He said Inui had been controlling his body even while aware of it and called him a crazy boy. Inui then pushed Indy away, dragged Tetsuro behind him, and warned him not to use the harmony system again, saying he couldn't move his body. He asked Tetsuro what the difference was between him and Periorn, as both had exploited and used him as a tool. Inui then opened the elevator and threw Tetsuro towards someone, telling him to be a good boy and hide well. Tetsuro told him it was he who had asked him to act like a child before. Meanwhile, Indy approached them. Inui quickly entered the elevator and closed the door, cutting off one of Indy's spider legs. He told Tetsuro he was a troublesome kid, and warned him not to use the harmony system again, or his brain would burn out. He also said Inui's body was badly hurt because of Tetsuro, and that attacking Indy was now just a matter of time. Neither of them had any way to stop her. On the other side, while they were descending in the elevator, Indy was chasing them from outside. Inui told Tetsuro that Indy's survival rate was 90%, but if aimed at her body expansions, Inui asked Tetsuro to pull the trigger. Tetsuro was shocked, thinking, will he kill Indy with his own hand? Suddenly, Indy pierced the elevator with her spider legs. Inui protected Tetsuro's head with his hands, and Tetsuro remembered Anne's last words to him about saving Indy. He then gripped Inui's trigger with determination and shot Indy. Later, Inui carried Tetsuro on his back, and told him that Miyari hadn't been expelled from Kyoshi thanks to the Huang brothers, but now they had changed and become enemies of Periorn. He told Tetsuro that Indy's venom, which paralyzed the expander's brains, was a special program to paralyze the expander's brain. However, its effect was weaker on Tetsuro because he was an old wartime expander. Inui reassured Tetsuro that Miyari would create an antidote program, and the children would be fine. Tetsuro then asked Inui if he had let him control his body on purpose. Inui said controlling his arm took effort, which was why Periorn was desperately trying to reclaim him. Inui then threw Tetsuro to the ground, and warned him not to use the harmony system on him again, saying he had helped him this time only because he had accepted the task of protecting him. However, he didn't intend to let anyone use his trigger again, and would make Tetsuro continue his journey alone from now on. Inui then started walking, but Tetsuro stopped him, saying he didn't want to experience living alone again. Inui stood in his office, puffing on a cigarette with frustration because his favorite cigarettes had disappeared from the market since the Indy incident. Meanwhile, Miyari was trying to treat Tetsuro to enable him to use his prosthetic limbs and told him that the pain he felt meant that the sensation in his feet was still alive. She asked him to endure the pain for a little while longer. After Miyari finished, she said there were some things she wanted to test on the harmony, but she preferred to do that later. At the same time, the news announced that a flying object had been launched from Kyusei's basement, making the security office suspect that Kyusei's group was conducting illegal weapons research. Inui then turned off the TV, and Miyari wondered if it wouldn't be bad if the expansion suppression office discovered it. Tetsuro asked what that office was, and Miyari explained that it was part of the reconstruction agency, the same place where countermeasures against the expanders were planned. Miyari clarified that expanders like Inui, who had weapons, were called saturated expanders and were illegal entities. Therefore, they sought protection from the Expansion Suppression Office to live normal lives, but if that protection were revoked for any reason, they would no longer be treated as humans, as the office would arrest and dismantle them. Miyari screamed this, startling Tetsuro, and Inoi grabbed her by the back of her jacket, dangling her like a cat and demanding she stop shouting and speaking unnecessarily. Inoi suddenly let her go, and Miyari asked him why he had done that. Tetsuro then decided to leave, saying all of this was his fault, but Inoi grabbed him just as he had grabbed Miyari and asked where he was going. Tetsuro asked if he would be dismantled if he got further involved, but Inoi threw him violently onto the sofa, reminding him that he could never hide from Barryorn. Inoi emphasized that an agent must follow the analyzer's orders and only think about how to pay his wages. Miyari reassured him that everyone there was used to Inoi's troubles. Miyari then looked at Inoi and mentioned that Christina had prepared a crab pot sent by Huang as a reward for deterring Indy's rampage. She asked him why he wouldn't go get it, and Inoi replied that his office wasn't a restaurant. Miyari advised him not to contradict Christina because she had fixed his broken window. Tetsuro then decided to go to the owner to apologize about the broken window. Inoi advised him not to go alone, but Tetsuro said there wouldn't be a problem. Soon after, Inoi and Miyari heard Tetsuro screaming for help. The scene quickly changed, with Christina having kissed Tetsuro's face everywhere. She apologized, saying she couldn't control herself around such a nice boy like Tetsuro, but she hadn't known he was Inoi's agent. Miyari said it was fine, and she directed her words to Tetsuro, telling him he was lucky it hadn't gone further. Christina then uncovered the crab pot, saying the crab was large and barely fit in the pot but was almost ready. Miyari wondered if they should have invited Scarlet or her father, but Christina said they had said they couldn't leave the store, so she would send them some food. Tetsuro suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to vomit when he saw the crab, remembering Indy's spider-like form and being disgusted by the situation. He apologized to everyone for his reaction, and Christina asked if he didn't like crab. She offered him mochi kinchaku, and also offered some to Miyari and Inoi, but Inoi quickly ran away from the place. Tetsuro wondered if something had disturbed him, and Christina said Inoi wasn't used to such atmospheres, while Miyari added that Inoi was similar to Tetsuro, always feared exposing those around him to harm, and thus avoided getting too close to anyone. Meanwhile, Inoi was standing outside, smoking, and noticed two officers harassing Scarlet despite her pleas. When one of them told her they deserved kindness because they had given up their free time for patrols, Inoi approached them and asked what kind of dogs they were. Both officers immediately replied, "Saturated expander." Inoi told them he was an ordinary citizen with a permit from the Reconstruction Agency. The officers analyzed Inoi's data through a small device and found that he indeed had a permit, so they left immediately, annoyed. Inoi sarcastically asked them to return to the office and have some cake. Scarlet then thanked Inoi, and he told her it was her good fortune that he had some business with her father. Inoi then entered the store, calling out to Scarlet's father as, "Old man," but he didn't respond. Scarlet ran in, calling out for her father anxiously. The old man woke up saying, the crab looked extremely delicious, and then looked at Inoi and said, "It's been a long time since I've seen you. I wonder if someone's on your tail." Later, the old man started cleaning Inoi's gun, saying he had been running the store for 5 years, but it was the only place where he could practice his profession. Inoi told the old man that while he seemed skilled, there were no customers in the store, which wasn't a good sign, and it would get him into trouble if the store closed. Scarlet said she would never let that happen. The old man then asked Inoi to lie on his back so he could clean the gun's muzzle. Scarlet placed a towel on his face, but suddenly, Olivert appeared and told Inoi that she knew Barryorn was hunting him. Inoi calmly said he had expected her to show up. Olivert informed him that he was accused of using his restricted weapon and that it was time to arrest and dismantle him. On the other side, Miyari was scolding Tetsuro because he had said he couldn't eat the crab, but he had devoured her food after finishing his porridge. Tetsuro said there was no harm in sharing food with others, and he asked her to open the store door because they were going to give the porridge to Scarlet and her father. As soon as they entered the store, they found Olivert and her men inside. Olivert then told Tetsuro and Miyari to return later. Tetsuro realized that Olivert was from the Expansion Suppression Office and that Inoi was about to be dismantled. Meanwhile, Inoi told the old man that the anti-rust oil he had used last time was good and that he wanted to try it again. Olivert asked Inoi why he was in a place like that when he was just a gun. Inoi replied that he maintained his cleanliness. Olivert gave him 3 minutes, while the old man said he would entrust Scarlet with the task because his underwear was wet from tension. Scarlet said she would do her best. Later, Miyari, Tetsuro, Scarlet, and her father were tied up in the Expansion Suppression Office's wagon. Tetsuro thought to himself that if he had used Harmony on those expanders, they could have escaped, but Miyari immediately warned him not to reveal the Harmony system, telling him to be patient and trust Inoi. Later, Inoi complained about Scarlet pouring oil all over his head and not finishing her task, which made his cylinder not turn properly. Olivert sat in front of him, saying he was the only one who could ask her to shelter ordinary civilians, even though she was the head of the Expansion Suppression Unit. Inoi said he couldn't leave them behind, and Olivert told him he owed her and must repay his debt. Olivert continued, saying it was impossible to announce a partnership between the Expansion Suppression Office and a saturated expander. She also mentioned that there were suspicions that high-ranking officials in the office were close to Barryorn. Inoi guessed that she was planning to assign him a troublesome task, which he considered worse than sending him to jail. Olivert reminded him of their previous agreement that he would fulfill her requests in exchange for her covering up his mistakes. If not, she would send him to the vendor-bender facility for expander rehabilitation. Inoi asked what what had happened, and Olivert explained that a prison truck from the Expansion Suppression Office's correctional facility had been attacked that morning, allowing 7 prisoners being transported to Baryorn's research facility to escape. Inouye asked how they were related to Baryorn, and Olivert explained that the sub-brain limiter required to control expanders was monopolized by Baryorn, and thus they regularly sent expanders to Baryorn in exchange for their cooperation. Olivert admitted she disliked the situation but currently lacked the power to change it. Inouye called her a cunning woman because she had given him a choice between hunting down the escaped prisoners or being punished as she pleased. Suddenly, the driver stopped and said, "It seems there's been an accident." Inouye asked Olivert about the prisoners, and she said her unit had captured 5, and the other 2 had been located. During their conversation, the vehicle behind them overturned under the bridge due to an attack by one of the prisoners. Later, an expander attacked the prisoner, firing at the other expanders and striking them with his wire-like arms before electrocuting them. On the other side, the protagonist rushed out of the overturned vehicle. Inouye tore through the wreckage to rescue them, while Cronin suddenly appeared and injected the prisoner with a paralytic, telling him his enhanced parts wouldn't move for a while, and ordered him to be taken back to his cell. Olivert scolded him, reminding him that their superiors had ordered them to keep the prisoner's capture secret. Cronin said he was just doing his job. Inouye then ran to check on his companions, and Cronin asked Olivert if she was planning to ask for Inouye's help. Olivert said Inouye had immunity, but Cronin argued that they should focus on capturing the last prisoner themselves and refused to involve Inouye, pointing out that the last prisoner, Hayden, was the first officially recorded rebellious expander and thus wasn't an easy target. Olivier sat in her office with Inouye, sighing as Cronin refused to follow her orders, and her superiors stirred suspicions behind her back. Inouye then asked her about his companions, and Olivier showed him their photos, saying she had placed them under her unit's protection. However, among them was an unidentified expander, whose body was damaged due to illegal augmentation. She had recently heard about an expander escaping from Baryorn. She warned Inouye not to try to sabotage things, or she would send him and his agent to Vendor Binder. Inouye told her she was terrifying, and Olivier showed him a photo of Hayden, explaining that he was the last prisoner, a former soldier assigned 15 years ago to the western North Scott area. He underwent initial expansion experiments, but during the Great War, most records were lost. Hayden's role during the war was completely unknown, except for the remaining North Scott record, where Hayden was injured 10 years ago in an unexplained rage, killing 16 soldiers from his unit. This led the Expansion Suppression Office to arrest him, and he remained a prisoner in Vendor Binder without ever being brought to trial. Olivier then took Inouye to the morgue, saying Hayden was a suspect in 3 new murders since his escape 48 hours ago. The victims were a delivery driver, an unidentified man, and a key man from the Reconstruction Agency. Olivier continued, stating there was no common denominator among the victims, and the killing methods were random. However, they all had one thing in common: full-body expansions. Olivier uncovered one of the victims, revealing that their subbrains were taken from the crime scene, making it impossible to confirm the exact time of death. When Inouye asked why she blamed Hayden, Olivier fully uncovered the victim, explaining that Hayden had carved his record number into the chest of each victim. Olivier suspected Hayden might have an accomplice and had looked into Spetsbergen's involvement, but found nothing. Inouye asked why the suppression group hadn't helped Hayden, and Olivier explained that the North Scott incident was the first case of a berserk expander. At the time, expansion experts insisted Hayden's actions had nothing to do with his augmentations, while anti-expansion groups claimed the technology was dangerous. Olivier added that if Hayden's actions had been linked to his expansions, this might not have happened, and for the same reason, Hayden was a valuable target for Spetsbergen. Inouye asked what she planned to do with Hayden, and Olivier said she couldn't touch him because he was serving a life sentence in Vendor Binder. However, she ordered Inouye to stop Hayden from killing more victims and bring him back alive, possibly allowing him to face trial. Inouye asked if this was her genuine wish, and Olivier replied that it was her duty as the director of the suppression office. Inouye left the morgue, asking her to count on him. Later, Olivier returned to her office and remembered her father advising her to always follow the law and justice, as other leaders had no right to act in their personal interests. She was then informed of a meeting she had to attend. Meanwhile, Inouye got out of a car in front of the third victim's house, asking the driver to wait, but the driver sped off, fearing Inouye would shoot him. Inouye entered the house of Philip Lemarie, a high-ranking official in the Reconstruction Agency, due to his wartime achievements. Philip had hidden in this backup house to prepare a speech for the unveiling of the armed mega statue. As Inouye moved through the house, he noticed the attack on Philip was one-sided, yet he was surprised that the victim had full-body expansions but was killed easily. Inouye paused at Philip's photos, but Cronin suddenly appeared, throwing needles at Inouye, who dodged and caught them. Cronin asked why he was there, and Inouye asked the same, pointing out that Cronin's superiors had ordered him to abandon the case. Cronin said Inouye should be the one to drop it, as someone like him shouldn't be involved. Inouye replied that he didn't abandon his accepted missions. A short argument ensued, during which Inouye provoked Cronin, leading Cronin to charge at him with the needles implanted in his back. Inouye deflected his moves until Cronin surrendered. Inouye asked if that was all Cronin had, and Cronin explained that he had moved the needles a few millimeters away from their launch zones, making them less effective. Cronin ordered Inouye not to pretend he could move, but Inouye replied that Cronin's plan had been exposed. Cronin admitted he had wanted to knock Inouye out when he let his guard down but acknowledged Inouye's impressive skills without expansions. Inouye asked if Cronin had stopped trying to stop him, and Cronin said his needles were exhausted, so he couldn't stop a fully augmented expander like Inui, but he would keep watching and hunting augmented individuals who harmed humans, even if it cost him his life. Inui called Cronin obsessed and said he would tell him Hayden's next target. Cronin repeated, "Next target," and Inui raised a photo of Philip with some companions, explaining that the people in the photo, along with the victims, were all materials for the first-generation Tindalos unit. 3 had been killed, and only 2 remained. Hayden and mega-armed Tukisada, the first fully augmented man and a war hero who had devoted himself to expansion technology development. Tukisada had even made huge profits selling food to expanders. Inui then leaned against Cronin's car, and Cronin mentioned that Tukisada had gone to the Warren Memorial Park to inspect the armed statue before its unveiling. The two got in the car, and Inui complained about the narrow seats, pulling out a cigarette to light it. Cronin scolded him, saying the smell would linger in his vintage pre-war car. Inui dismissed its value, and Cronin told him to try ruining it and see if he would throw him out. Cronin drove off, and Inui remarked that he had failed to find any records linking Hayden to the victims. Cronin asked why he said that, and Inui explained that Hayden was the latest model based on collected battle data from Tindalos, and only a few people knew about Tindalos. Cronin said he didn't understand why Hayden was killing his companions but knew that a rebellious expander could act without reason. They arrived at the statue unveiling, where some anti-expansion protesters were present. Inui noticed a group carrying supportive signs for Tukisada, including a little girl who tripped and fell near Inui. He caught her, hiding his face, thinking it would scare her, but she said she wouldn't cry. Inui praised her, noting that adults usually ran from his appearance. The girl said his face somehow reminded her of something. Meanwhile, Tukisada arrived, and the girl ran off. A disabled child asked Tukisada to show him his famous move, and Tukisada punched the ground with immense force. Cronin said Tukisada was loud and had the power of an air cannon, and now he understood why Hayden was targeting him. The little girl called out to Tukisada to give him flowers, and as Tukisada reached for them, someone rushed from the crowd toward him. Inui quickly grabbed and restrained the attacker, ordering Tukisada to leave. Inui told the attacker he would become his enemy if he kept trying to harm people like this. The attacker broke free and demanded Inui not interfere, but Cronin suddenly threw needles at Inui from behind, saying he would capture the attacker. Cronin pressed Inui's trigger and fired at the attacker, who fell to the ground. Inui said it wasn't Hayden, and Tukisada distanced himself from the crowd, praising the little girl for staying calm and brave. His followers told him they should leave, but suddenly, Tukisada saw his followers floating in the air, held up by the little girl. She quickly turned and removed her hood, revealing that she wasn't just a little girl. Hayden was in disguise. On one side, a crucial meeting was held by the leaders of Olivier, where one of them mentioned that she not only disobeyed orders regarding the secret capture of Hayden, but also acted behind their backs. Olivier justified this by stating, Hayden is a key witness to the Scott Nightmare incident, and as the director of the anti-expansion office, she decided to capture him alive. The leader replied, recalling that her father was a victim of the military police, suggesting she might seek revenge through Hayden. However, he assigned someone else to handle the matter and suspended her from duty. On the other side, Hayden was playing hide-and-seek with Armed when Inoue and Cronin arrived. Hayden fled after causing a commotion. Armed then mentioned to Inoue that he remembered being part of a unit called the Gun Service, which he saw during the war. Meanwhile, Miyari and others overheard Olivier's subordinate discussing what they would do now that a new director had replaced Olivier. Miyari expressed concern for Inoue, especially about his smoking habits, suggesting he might be using cigarettes to cope with stress. She planned to give him a pack to help him relax. However, Tetsuro, her companion, questioned if this was a bad idea. Miyari explained that the bigger problem was Inoue using cigarettes to suppress something else, though it would be good if he quit. Tetsuro then approached the door, banged on it, and called for the guards. A guard responded through a small slot, asking him to be quiet. Tetsuro thought the slot could be used to pass cigarettes. Miyari asked if he really intended to send cigarettes to Inoue, and Tetsuro confirmed he would, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Inoue introduced himself to Armed, stating he had a mission to capture Hayden. Armed revealed that his comrades from the first experimental expansion unit were all killed by Hayden, making Hayden his last target. Armed questioned how this happened, and Inoue asked if Hayden had not targeted them. Armed arrogantly replied that many targeted someone like him, but Hayden had targeted his entire unit. He explained Hayden's abilities during the war, his disguise through sub-armor and nanocrystallic parts, and his exceptional tactical skills. Cronin added that Hayden's disguise explained why he could easily kill fully expanded individuals. Armed described Hayden's strength as a burden on his subbrain and linked his actions to the Scott Nightmare incident. Cronin mentioned that subbrain targeting was difficult in old models. He then informed Inoue that Olivier had been removed from her position, and the new director ordered all anti-expansion office officers to withdraw from the mission. Cronin suspected the leaders intended to kill Hayden to resolve the issue quietly. Inoue remarked that they believed erasing the problem would make it seem non-existent, even though they knew battles left lasting scars. Cronin advised Inoue not to get further involved since Olivier no longer had the power to protect him. Inoue refused to withdraw unless Olivier asked him to. Cronin then threw a dart at Inoue and told him this was the last time he would tolerate his actions. Armed commented on how difficult government employees were in every era. After Cronin left, Hayden suddenly appeared, attacking Armed and restraining him with metal chains. He criticized Armed, mentioning that everyone was just test subjects during the war. Inoue removed his jacket, challenging Hayden to a fight to see whose subbrain would collapse first. The two engaged in intense combat, with Inoue dodging Hayden's metal chains and countering with precise punches. Armed criticized Inoue's reckless fighting style, while Hayden tried to penetrate Inoue's body with his chains. Inoue managed to land a decisive blow, revealing Hayden's subbrain location. Hayden retreated, but Armed noted that Inoue was one step away from eliminating him. Cronin, however, appeared in the corridor, stopping Hayden with a dart. Inoue approached Cronin, who justified his late arrival by saying Hayden would have escaped otherwise. Inoue mentioned that Cronin seemed eager for a fight, but Armed commented that Inoue was confident Cronin would stop Hayden because he knew where his subbrain was located. On another front, Seven asked Pepper what was happening. Pepper explained that someone resembling Hayden had cut off her connection. She mentioned that while the Harmony could control an expanded individual, the user's brain interfered with theirs. She was about to kill Armed, but was stopped by the pistol head. In the morgue, Olivier stood with the coroner while guards urged her to hurry, as their mission was to return her home safely. Olivier questioned the coroner about his report. He explained that the delivery driver, the first victim, had died differently than the others, with a blow to the chest that stopped his heart. Olivier asked if Hayden had tried to hide the cause of death, and the coroner suggested there might be another person involved. Suddenly, a man appeared, knocking down one of the guards, and introduced himself as Tetsuro, controlling an expanded individual. He asked Olivier where Inoue was. On another side, Inoue was carrying Hayden and complained about the heavy task. Cronin refused to help, saying it was impossible to carry an expanded individual. Armed examined a door, noting it required manual opening. Cronin ordered Inoue to carry Hayden carefully, as he was a key witness to the Scott Nightmare incident and crucial for the former director's case. Hayden suddenly regained consciousness, struggled, and asked where he was and what happened to the war. Cronin noted Hayden was confused and needed immediate treatment, as he might reveal valuable information. Armed commented that revealing the truth about the Scott Nightmare incident would hinder expansion technology and the country's economy. He decided to eliminate both Hayden and Inoue. Armed punched Cronin in the chest, calling him a hypocrite, and Inoue punched Armed in response. Then the scene changed, showing Oliver's father congratulating her for being accepted as the top student entering the military academy. Her father told her then that he would fulfill any wish she desired. Oliver asked him why he chose military police out of all the jobs, and whether his job didn't create enmity between him and his colleagues. Her father replied that she resembled her mother and was overthinking it. He was assigned to investigate something related to expansion technology in North Scott, where prisoners were reportedly being treated unfairly, and communication had also been cut off with the officers who went there a few days ago. Therefore, someone had to take on this task. Oliver told her father that she would rise to the highest rank in the military police and then fire him, but by then, he should return safely. Her father promised her that and told her he would buy the famous canned food from North Scott because it was amazing. At that moment, Oliver looked at one of the cans in her hand and asked Tisser with suspicion, "Did he say his name was Tisser?" Tisser replied to Oliver, saying that someone had seen Hayden at the memorial park at the end of the war, and Inoue must be there. Therefore, he should deliver his cigarettes as soon as possible, or else Inoue would be in danger. Oliver said that she would also get into trouble if Inoue collapsed. Tisser and Oliver then arrived at a place in a car, where the two noticed an explosion coming from somewhere. Tisser immediately ran to the place, saying, "That's Inoue." At that point, Oliver remembered when Inoue had asked her if she truly wanted to bring Hayden to trial. On the other side, Armed was praising Inoue's incredible strength, despite his serious injuries. Armed then picked up a hand-rolled cigarette and said it was made of high-quality materials, unlike the cigarettes found in Kiyoshi's Abyss. Armed continued, saying that it seemed Inoue's mental state was unstable due to the high concentration he was using, and that he was exhausted from multiple fights. Therefore, Inoue had undoubtedly lost his ability to stand. Inoue asked Armed what he intended to do. Armed replied that the members of Tindalos had sacrificed their bodies during the Great War to provide expansion technology, leading their country to progress. However, in the isolated testing room 303, their dignity was easily stripped from them. Therefore, he had to continue standing as a hero for others. Inoue told Armed that he didn't understand anything. Armed then lifted Inoue and slammed him against the wall, explaining that the shotgun unit was created using Tindalos data, and the founder of expansion technology at that time was Professor Wachowski, who worked with the Periorn Company to create shotgun services from war expanders. However, the model was withdrawn before the end of the war, and yet he never imagined meeting one of those models. Armed continued, saying that there were many expanders like Inoue, but they had lost their value after the war. Armed offered Inoue to join him to improve the situation of expanders in society. Inoue grabbed Armed's hand, which was on his neck, and asked for a cigarette because the one he had crushed earlier was his last. Armed loosened his grip, and Inoue fell to the ground. Armed then walked away, saying he would carry Inoue's spirit on his shoulders and move forward with his plans. Armed approached Hayden, who was lying on the ground, and said that Hayden had to sacrifice himself for everyone. Armed then looked at Inoue, whose face was pressed against the ground, and said that if the shotgun unit had obtained a handheld launcher, they could have shown power that would have changed the course of the war. Armed then remembered a previous war scene where he and a comrade were in the middle of a battle, and they were asked to surrender. But suddenly, Inui stood up again after gathering his strength, pulling Armed out of his memories. Inui appeared furious, and sharp tools came out of his back. Armed said in astonishment, "This is Inui's true form." Inui then asked to join the fight, and Armed said that the quality of the weapon didn't matter as long as there was no suitable user. Armed approached Inui, mocking him, saying he was just a tool in the end. Just as Armed was about to punch Inui, Inui obtained confirmation to attack and join the fight. Inui grabbed Armed's fist and threw him away, then kicked him, but Armed quickly countered and unloaded his weapon on Inui, telling him that he was a weapon and that's why they called him Mega Armed. However, Inui was unharmed, grabbed Armed, and slammed him to the ground. Armed stood up again, saying that he had driven Hayden to madness to eliminate the officers who came to investigate the research facility. His goal was to protect the dignity of all expanders, so he wouldn't let a hero like him have his dignity fall in such a way. At least, he would eliminate Hayden before he regained consciousness. Meanwhile, Oliver had arrived at the same place and asked Arm to explain what he had just heard. Arm said he knew her. She was the director of the Expansion Control Office. Oliver said that Hayden had a fit of rage 10 years ago at the Norse Scott Research Facility and killed 16 military police officers, including her father. This incident was known as the Norse Scott Nightmare. She had just heard him say that the officers were eliminated, so what did he mean by that? Armed replied that the research being conducted at the facility was essential for the future of expanders in that country, but the officers didn't understand this, so Hayden took advantage of that to kill them. Oliver said that in that case, she would consider him her father's murderer. Arm said he didn't raise his hand against women and children because he was a hero. Before he could finish his sentence, Inui jumped over the wall with a loud noise. Oliver was shocked by his appearance, and even more surprised by Tisser's attempt to stop him, as Tisser stuck to Inui's back to restrain him. Tisser kept telling Inui that there was no need to get that agitated just because he had run out of cigarettes, but Inui threw Tisser to the ground. Arm said at that moment that he was working for a great cause and wouldn't let anyone stop him. Oliver then remembered standing in the morgue in front of her father's body, breaking down and asking Inui to please kill Armed. Inui asked her if that was truly her wish. Inui then passed out, and Arm stood up, saying that Inui had finally reached the limits of his secondary brain. He asked Oliver to imagine the state of the country if someone like Inui fell. He explained that the bridge he had built between expanders and anti-expanders would collapse, and the lack of trust between the two groups would create a significant economic gap. Therefore, his existence was important. Oliver said her father was a strong man who had sacrificed his safety for the country, but Armed was using what he called a great cause to hide his own desires and was just a worthless criminal. Armed took advantage of Inui's collapse and loss of consciousness and challenged Oliver to stop him. Oliver grabbed a cigarette, lit it, and blew the smoke into Inui's mouth. Just as Armed grabbed a rod and approached Oliver to kill her, Oliver desperately asked Inui, "Are you going to let your agent die?" Inui suddenly blocked Arm's rod and said he had fallen asleep unintentionally. Inui then stabbed the rod into Arm's body, causing Arm to lose consciousness. At that moment, Tisser asked Inui if he had returned to normal, while Oliver started coughing. Inui asked her with concern what was happening. She said she had inhaled cigarette smoke, so she was coughing because of the smell. Expansion Control Office. Expanders then arrived and told Oliver she was under arrest. Oliver stood up and asked Tisser to take Inui away. She thanked Inui, saying she would handle things from there. Oliver then opened one of the cans she had in her hand, and all the men immediately backed away, saying that some gas had been detected. On the other side, Tisser was accompanying Inui outside and supporting him. Inui told Tisser that he had ordered him not to use resonance again. Tisser replied that the order was only for him not to use resonance again, but he had to use it to detain them without their consultation. Tisser told Inui that he understood his concern, but that he should trust Miari and the others more. Inui said that Tisser was just as arrogant as usual. On the other side, Oliver sat with Armed in a truck, telling him that she had sent a recording of his confession to someone she knew at the Department of Justice. Therefore, he couldn't avoid going to court. Armed asked her if she knew who had made him a hero in the eyes of the people. Armed said that neither the Department of Justice nor the Expansion Control Office could handle this case. At the same time, Bieber launched a missile at Arm's truck with the help of her friend Seven's gun. The missile hit the truck, but Bieber complained that she didn't like using Seven's gun because the smell of gunpowder made her nose bleed. But it was enough that the hero had completed his mission by dying and becoming a puppet, just as Periorn had always wanted. There was a meeting somewhere between Matilda and Emilda and the Secretary Ku, where Matilda and Emilda introduced the head of security, Cunningham, to the Secretary Ku. The Secretary Ku asked Cunningham how long it had been since they last met, and Cunningham told her it had been since the announcement of his failure in negotiating with a Kyosi Holes analyst. He mentioned he had come that day to get a chance to correct his mistakes. He informed her that they had eliminated Armid despite an unexpected circumstance. Even though they had empowered Armid and made him a hero in the eyes of the people for years, he was threatened with exposing the truth of the Scott Seagull incident by a former member of Tindalos. As a result, Armid recklessly killed the man and asked for their help in covering up the evidence. They had no choice but to take control of Hayden and turn the crime into a series of serial murders. Afterward, they got rid of Armid and made him the last victim, considering he was the reason for stirring up the case from the beginning. Secretary Ku said she had admired Armid's enthusiasm, until he started making mistakes by abusing the power given to him. However, she didn't remember issuing any orders regarding the use of the gun service unit or involving the anti-expansion office director in the case. Cunningham was shocked, while the secretary continued, saying that even the smallest cog going out of place could create a big problem in the operation of a large company. Although she had intended to turn him into a simple cog, she would give him one last chance since the matter had reached the president's ears. Cunningham continued walking inside the facility, angry at the secretary's words. Yeber told him that someone as thick-skinned as him didn't deserve that angry face. Cunningham replied that neither she nor Seven had done their jobs precisely, but Yeber scolded him, saying they had gotten rid of Armid as he had asked. Cunningham told her not to raise her voice, and reminded her that she was the younger sister of Sister Karen. Yeber replied that Karen had nothing to do with it. Then, Seven suddenly appeared from behind and told Yeber how dare she speak to Cunningham like that. Cunningham was terrified of Seven's sudden appearance. Yeber said to Cunningham, throwing something at him, that he had made a mistake by giving them such a poor tool. The expander had messed with her head, and in the end, the Harmony device broke down. Cunningham picked up the tool and said it was just a counterfeit. He turned to Yeber and Seven and said he would call them again, but they should stay quiet until then. Cunningham got in his car and left. Yeber remembered Inui's fighting style and said in admiration that she had found someone exciting, so she couldn't stay silent. Seven tried to warn her about being reckless, but she told him he was pathetic despite his huge body. On the other side, Cunningham said in his car that the members of Fortcell, or the original founders of Periorn, wouldn't understand how terrifying real people like him were. He thought about their power and how they had ended a massive war that lasted more than half a century. It was rumored they had great power in the shadows even before the war started, and some even believed they were the ones who sparked the war. Meanwhile, Matilda and Emilda were telling the secretary about a report on the new walking assist devices. The facility had also witnessed some deaths caused by issues with the subbrains due to these devices. They received complaints from the families of expanders about this, but they didn't know what to do. The secretary said she was sure they knew the meaning of Periorn's company logo, which symbolized the workers' union that founded Periorn and the evolutionary tree of expanders. The company aimed to bring development to the world. She ordered them to place flowers on the graves of anyone opposing the company. On the other side, Inui was smoking in his office, listening to the news about the grand funeral of the hero Armid, who died when a weak bridge collapsed. A commemorative area was opened in the end-of-war Memorial Park, and it would remain open to the public for a week. The news also mentioned the incidents caused by Periorn's new expansions. The victims' families withdrew their complaints. Inui turned off the TV and called someone to ask about Oliver's condition. In the meantime, Miyari and Tetsuro knocked on the door and told Inui the food was ready. Inui said he wasn't the type to get along with others. Tetsuro offered to help him with his work and perhaps benefit from Harmony. Inui shouted at him, saying his life was already in danger because of this stuff and that Harmony made people tools, which he hated. Miyari intervened, saying that if Tetsuro hadn't been there that day, Inui would now be just scrap metal sold in Kyoshi holes. Inui arrogantly said he would rather be scrap metal than accept help from a child. Miyari got angry and called him stubborn. She took Tetsuro's hand and said they would leave Inui with his strange head and go eat mochi. Inui told them he was extremely hungry and would share the hot dish, but wouldn't eat the very sticky things because they weren't considered edible. Miyari expressed her amazement at his attitude. Inui directed his words at Tetsuro, asking him to think about ways to protect himself, as they might be attacked at any moment, given that Periorn knew they were together. Suddenly, while they were talking, the room door fell, and Scarlet and Christina entered, saying they hadn't been spying and it had happened accidentally. Inui screamed at everyone to get out. Before Miyari left, she told Inui she would start living with him from that day on. Later, in Miyari's clinic, Miyari was treating Tetsuro and mentioned she had finished treating Indy. Therefore, she decided to live with him and Inui to take care of them. Tetsuro asked if he had to undergo regular maintenance checks for no specific reason. Miyari said the body needed regular maintenance, and since he had received a good electrical response from his muscles, they should do it regularly. Tetsuro looked at his feet and said he wouldn't mind if his legs were cut off since they didn't move anyway. Miyari said the burden of basic expansions was enough for the sub-brain, but in the future, if they found what they were looking for, she would cut off his limbs and install wonderful expansions. Tetsuro suddenly asked if she had become an expander engineer. Miyari said she had been looking for someone for a long time, a very skilled mechanic who had gone to war as a military engineer and never returned. That's why she had resorted to this work in hopes of meeting him again. Tetsuro wished her luck in meeting that person again. At that moment, Christina shouted for Miyari to come out for a moment, saying an expander had collapsed in front of the building, and she needed to take a look. Later, this expander, named Colt, lay on Miyari's table after she had administered the solution. Miyari said she had found Colt half a year ago, unconscious after his medication had run out. She explained that many expanders needed medication, even if they weren't saturated expanders like Inui. Colt had received illegal expansions that put enormous pressure on his subbrain. He had gotten those expansions to work at a construction site to support his family since miners weren't allowed to work there. It seemed it was time to remove those expansions. Colt suddenly woke up and grabbed Miyari's hand, saying he still needed that body. After some time, Miyari examined an artificial hand in detail. Colt said this was all he had as a thank you gift for her. The artificial hand had fine, multiple controls assembled in a simple way, allowing high output without relying on muscular power. Miyari said the creator of that hand was a genius, and that it was unbelievable he had gotten such valuable artificial limbs. Colt said he was also about to get a well-paying job, and would then pay her fully, and cover his mother's surgery costs. Miyari asked if his mother's condition had worsened again. Colt said Periorn had performed new expansions, and his mother had said if she succeeded, she would get a good job. Unfortunately, her expansions didn't harmonize with her subbrain brain, damaging her nerves severely. Miari told him the news had announced that the families had withdrawn their complaints against Periorn. Colt said it was all lies because Periorn had stated they wouldn't compensate the families for their injured members. Colt got up and said he could still manage somehow if he did his new job. Miari warned him against being reckless. Before Colt left the clinic, he made some bold remarks about Miari's private clothes and secretly took something. Tetsuro chased after him, asking him to return what he had taken, saying he wouldn't tell Miari. Colt refused, so Tetsuro had to subdue him for a moment. Colt came to his senses afterward and said he had thought his mind had burned out for a moment. Recognizing Tetsuro, Colt called him talented and asked for his help. They would only cut off the long branches, he said, and he would do the annoying work on his behalf. Tetsuro objected, asking if this was all he wanted to do. Colt asked if the desire to do something for those who believed they had a future wasn't worth it. He said he would wait for Tetsuro and Hugnu Armid at 3 the next day. When Colt left, Tetsuro was surprised by Miari screaming and asking where Colt had gone, because the expansion part he had given her was made by her older brother, Victor, whom she had been searching for. Later, Inui sat in his office, complaining that Miari had taken all the money he had received from Oliver. Meanwhile, 3 people suddenly entered his office and told him they were there to offer him a job to capture a man named Sari Shang, linked to an anti-expansion group known as Spitzbergen. Meanwhile, Colt offered food to a boy and a girl, telling them that starting tomorrow, he would provide them with more delicious food. The scene then shifted to a group of children chanting in front of a statue of Maya, praising the heroic deeds of Mayor Armid for leading the country to victory. Suddenly, a man interrupted them, claiming that Armid wasn't a hero but had collaborated with Perion and was involved in a 10-year-old case, even producing evidence to support his claims. Despite being restrained by Perion's special police, the man insisted on his accusations and demanded to be released. In the same location, Titaru appeared, telling Miari that the event was exclusively for Perion and important political figures. He was confused about why Colt was there, but remembered Colt had instructed him to come at 3 o'clock. Miari mentioned they couldn't use the tracker either. Titaru asked about the tracker, and Miari explained it was the device she had retrieved from Colt the previous day. She admitted Colt often collected such items, but hadn't expected him to retrieve the tracker himself. Titaru apologized, and Miari explained she knew he was only trying to resolve things peacefully without harming either of them. When Titaru mentioned the smell of garbage, Miari stepped out of a trash bin and told them to retreat. Titaru wondered if Colt knew more about her brother, and Miari reminded him that Perion was currently targeting Colt. Titaru questioned whether Miari thought her brother had returned safely from the war, given his ability to create such expansions. Miari hesitated, explaining that similar parts had been used in the war, making it hard to be certain. After a moment, she suggested they would meet Colt again. Miari stepped away and warned that engineers must always be cautious. Before she could finish, an entity grabbed her, and an alarm sounded about intruders. Titaru suddenly leaped in front of Miari and attempted to use harmony, but failed, exclaiming he couldn't control this thing. Miari told him not to act rashly, as they didn't fully understand harmony's functions yet. Meanwhile, the entity began to agitate, and an explosion erupted nearby. Both wondered about the explosion. On the other side, a man held a girl by the neck, but Inui intercepted him. The man remarked that Inui's face matched what he had been told. He placed a knife near the girl's head, threatening Inui not to come closer, accusing the girl of leaking important information despite his care for her. Just as the man was about to harm her, Inui quickly pushed him to the ground and asked if he was Sarashag. He denied involvement in terrorism, claiming he was merely a mediator who had provided a poor, expanded boy to Spitzbergen. At the event, the entity apprehended Tataru and Miari, but Colt followed, asking the entity to let them go. Colt turned to Tataru, happy for his arrival but surprised he brought Miari. Colt was stunned to realize Tataru controlled the entity. Miari asked about the explosion, and Colt explained it was the work he had mentioned earlier. He revealed that all of Perion's officials would board the train in front of them if anything went wrong at the event. The train, however, had a bomb set to explode, controlled by a device in Colt's hand. Miari understood his feelings but called it a terrible plan. Colt reassured her he wouldn't harm civilians, explaining his young sisters were starving and unaware of what the future held. He vowed to show them a better life, no matter the cost. Colt asked Taitaru to release him using the entity's body, but as they spoke, the train suddenly moved, and the control device slipped from Colt's hand. Colt chased after it, with Miari urging Tataru to follow. Tataru ran using the large body, and they met Colt on the train's roof. Colt advised Tataru to return, as the large body didn't suit him. Tataru asked what would happen to Colt's family if he were caught as a terrorist. Colt insisted on detonating the bomb himself, but first wanted to lose the Perion follower nearby. As the train sped on, and the Perion follower approached, Tataru offered to distract him while Colt escaped. Colt jumped over the man, who immediately turned to attack him, but Tataru leaped over him, refusing to let him harm Colt. Colt flew away, urging Tataru to hurry before reinforcements arrived. Colt reached the bomb and manually deactivated it. He then faced Tataru, but a voice from behind called him a lab rat, suggesting he had been blinded by Spitzbergen's offers. Colt turned to see the same man Tataru had been distracting earlier. Tataru reappeared with the man, apologizing to Colt. The Perion followers apprehended Colt, who sighed that they were too late, as he had already activated the bomb's failsafe. It would explode if removed. Colt told Miari and Tataru that his family would still receive the money even if he died, ensuring his sisters could see a future for themselves. The man accused Colt of betraying Perion and Spitzbergen, explaining that the train carried protesters and innocent orphans who had sung during the event. He claimed this would frame Spitzbergen for bombing innocents, elevating Perion's standing. The man ordered his subordinate to detach the car with the bomb. Colt tried to stop him, but the man shot Colt, severing his artificial arm. Colt managed to remove the bomb with his other hand, but his medication ran out, and the bomb nearly exploded. Titaru regained control of Harmony, saving Colt by throwing the bomb away. Miyari asked Titaru if he was hurt, but he hadn't noticed. She explained that Perion had used anti-expansion bullets, which had passed through Colt's body. If they didn't get him to a hospital soon, he would die. Colt coughed, assuring Miyari he was fine. He praised Titaru, thanking him for saving the innocents. Miyari asked about his artificial limbs, and Colt admitted he had stolen them from the black market. Colt apologized for the trouble he had caused, and asked Titaru to take control of his body to get him home. Miyari hesitated, mentioning Titaru had already strained his brain that day. Colt pleaded, and eventually, Titaru carried him home on his back. Throughout the journey, Colt talked non-stop, praising Titaru for his help despite barely knowing him. He thanked Titaru again and passed away. Meanwhile, Inui told Sarashang that the terrorist attack on Perion had failed. Sarashang replied that even if it had succeeded, it would have increased prejudice against expanders. He added that if it failed, they would dispose of expanders as criminals, calling it a very selfish approach. Sarashang revealed that Spitsbergen's goal was to eliminate all expanders. The man who had commissioned Enui for the case appeared, and Sarashang called him Rosso. Rosso explained he wasn't there as head of security, but had come because the weapons he sold to Spitsbergen had cost many families their loved ones. He took Sarashang away, leaving Inui to ponder the description of Victor, who longed to see him again. Inui was left confused, dropping his cigarette. Inui returned to his library, where a document was waiting for him, informing him that he was late. Inui replied that he had already closed for the day, but she insisted, saying she needed him to carry out a task for her. Suddenly, Seven attacked Inui from behind in the darkness, but Inui, more cautious, quickly deflected Seven and called him a coward. Meanwhile, Seven destroyed Inui's cigarette, while Inui repeatedly asked him to move his foot because it was a good cigarette. Seven replied that he only took orders from Pepper. Inui expressed pity for that, and the two faced off, ready to fight. Pepper interrupted them and told Inui that after comparing them face to face, she was certain he was completely different. He possessed the revolver of both past and present. Inui bowed down, picked up his trampled cigarette, and asked about a follower of Periorn. Pepper undressed, showing him the insignia, and he asked in surprise how he knew that. Though she didn't like the word follower, she admitted he was entirely correct. Inui told Pepper that a person currently needed a license from the reconstruction office to move freely, but he was puzzled by her right hand, which belonged to the pair, a device used to launch the control program for the Revolver maintenance unit. He was surprised such things still existed. Inui turned to extinguish his cigarette, saying the reconstruction office would never allow one of the pair to walk around with a Revolver maintenance unit. This meant Periorn was the only one capable of using them. Pepper suspiciously asked if his name was Inui Jozo. She glanced around the office, confirming it was empty, and noted he didn't seem connected to anything there. She noticed a book and touched it, saying she loved books because printed words became tangible things one could possess. Pepper then said she came for personal reasons, explaining that all her tools had owners, and she wanted to defeat him and his owner, after which she would write her name on him. After that, Seven bowed to Pepper, and she pulled something from his back. A storm-like dust cloud erupted, and Pepper ordered Seven to destroy Inui. Inui quickly understood that the combat program had been activated by the pair, and Seven and Pepper were about to engage him in battle. The fight began, and Inui swiftly threw Seven at Pepper's feet without effort. Pepper urged Seven not to disappoint her. Seven stood up again and threw a quick punch at Inui's face, causing an explosion that sent both crashing out of the office, destroying the wall, and causing a massive explosion. Pepper followed them downstairs and asked Inui if he really didn't have control over his revolver, saying he would die at this rate. Inui stood up, saying he only used his strength to complete the tasks he accepted, and wouldn't listen to her trivial requests. Pepper said she was even more impressed by him. Pepper rushed at him with her sharp weapon, but Tetsuo jumped in front of Inui to protect him. At the same time, Pepper realized Tetsuo had taken control of Seven's body. She exclaimed in disbelief, "Impossible." Tetsuo soon lost his strength, and Miyari anxiously told him he had used too much resonance. Pepper repeated in shock, "Resonance?" Meanwhile, Christina screamed as her building was destroyed. Pepper began rubbing her head, saying it must have been Tetsuo, the boy Periorn had mentioned, and it would be regrettable if she laid hands on him. Pepper approached Inui, licked his face, and commented, "Delicious," while Miyari watched in amazement. Pepper then told Seven the matter was over and they should leave. She scolded Seven for letting someone else control him, and denied him sweets as punishment. Seven ran after her, while Inui suddenly collapsed, injured. Later, expansion suppression officers arrived to inspect Christina's building, and Christina, furious, demanded they find the culprit quickly. Meanwhile, Inui lit a cigarette after being treated for his injuries, and told Cronin that the combination of the Revolver maintenance unit and one of the pair was a tough opponent for him. Inui called himself that day's victim, and asked Cronin to stay silent and do his job, which his bribes covered. Christina threateningly said she would stop paying taxes if they didn't find the culprit. However, when she saw Cronin, she complimented him on his looks and asked if he knew Inui. She guessed he might be the president since he looked different from the others inspecting the place. Cronin later sat in front of Inui, showing him pictures of Seven and Pepper, explaining they were the ones who attacked him and were analysts under Periorn. He added that they seemed to be eliminating those who opposed the company. Inui said he didn't want to admit they shared the same job. Cronin guessed they might have been the ones who attacked Director Oliviero a few days ago, though their main target then was likely Mega Armed or Hayden, suggesting Periorn Perriorn had paid to hide the truth. Inui said he should go after them and demand compensation for the building repairs, or he would be fired. Cronin stood up, saying the Expansion Suppression Office had decided to withdraw from the case and not pursue the two. He promised to assign monitors to the building but advised Inui to protect himself too. Inui asked if fear was why they withdrew. Cronin requested not to be underestimated, as he still held his principles despite the organization's decision. Before leaving, Cronin mentioned that the search for Perriorn's missing CEO's son had been called off, though he suspected it was connected to something Inui was hiding. After Cronin left, Inui gazed at the sleeping Tetsuo, recalling Pepper's withdrawal upon discovering Tetsuo and Perriorn's withdrawal from searching for Tetsuo. Inui worriedly wondered what Perriorn was planning now. Inui sat on a chair, remembering Cronin's words about how the Revolver maintenance unit and one of the pair seemed like tough opponents, making him pitiable. Pepper's words echoed in his mind, all tools have owners. He recalled Tetsuo's offer to help him with his work. Lost in thought, Inui remembered a time when someone driving a truck told him the area was filled with white down in spring. Though it was a beautiful sight worth seeing, the person reminded him to follow his superior's orders, saying he was wrong to treat him as a person, not as a tool. At the time, Inui was bound somewhere in the truck. Tetsuo suddenly woke up and called out to the distracted Inui. When Inui didn't respond, Tetsuo thought he was tired and almost called Miyari, but Inui stopped him, saying he was fine. Inui mentioned he didn't feel pain because his body wasn't like human flesh. Inui asked Tetsuo if his face was seriously injured because Miyari was extremely worried. Tetsuo said it seemed like burns. Inui asked what he meant by seemed, and Tetsuo explained Miyari told him his name was Rinin, meaning he received the same damage as the expander he controlled. Inui asked if using resonance again would cause harm, but Tetsuo remained silent and stood to light Inui's cigarette. Inui thanked him, and Tetsuo apologized, saying everyone was in danger because of him and that he had even caused Inui's injury. Inui told him they had come for him, though he didn't know why. Tetsuo remembered Annie and Colt, who died as soon as he reached his house. He cried, overwhelmed, saying he could have saved everyone if he had been stronger. Later, Inui stood by his office window, reflecting on the scene. Miyari entered, telling him she had brought a client. Inui turned to her, repeating, client, as the client entered, removing his hat and saying his words might seem surprising, but he wanted Inui to protect a specific girl from an expander ghost stalking her. Later, Inui and Miyari appeared in the client's open-top car, with Miyari enjoying herself immensely. Inui asked why she had come and left Tetsuo behind. Miyari said Tetsuo would be fine under the Expansion Suppression Office's protection, and Perriorn couldn't do anything reckless. If Tetsuo tried to force the door open, a high-voltage current would be released. Inui wondered when she had installed something so dangerous. Miyari ignored the question and said she had to accompany him as his personal engineer, especially after they failed to save his left arm. Plus, the expander ghost intrigued her, as she might get to see an old model expander. They soon arrived at McMahon's mansion. Inui and Miyari then went downstairs, following their client, Danny Joe, who worked at the Ministry of Justice. Danny stood in front of the gates of McMahon Manor, accompanied by Inui and Miyari. Earlier, Danny had assigned Inui the task of protecting Rose, the daughter of his late friend George McMahon, the former owner of McMahon Manor. When Inui entered the manor, it seemed like a routine mission. Inui learned that Rose had been in a car accident a few days ago, which killed her parents, leaving her as the sole survivor. However, Rose lost one leg and suffered severe injuries. Since then, strange occurrences had been happening inside the manor. Some servants claimed to have seen a shadowy figure, and Danny mentioned that most of the staff had resigned because of this incident, leaving no one to care for Rose. Inui remarked that he understood what was going on but wasn't a fortune teller. He asked Danny if he was sure Inui was the right person for the job. Danny calmly replied that he had encountered the shadowy figure everyone was talking about and even chased it, but unfortunately lost it. Danny then stood by a window and asked Inui to look outside. Inui noticed footprints in the garden and wondered if they belonged to the shadowy figure. Danny said he didn't believe it was a ghost, but Rose did. Danny then turned to Inui and explained that he and his late friend George had been working on solving cases involving stretchers. He wanted to uncover the killer's motive to protect Rose from constant danger. Danny then took Inui and Miyari to Rose's room, but when they entered, the room seemed empty. Danny quickly pulled Rose out from under the bed, asking if she had hidden in the same spot again. Rose replied that she always felt like someone was lurking around, convinced the shadowy figure was targeting her. Suddenly, Rose noticed Inui and Miyari in her room, and threw a nearby vase at Inui's head, angrily asking why there was a stretcher in her room. Miyari looked at Inui with concern. Danny tried to calm Rose down, explaining that he had hired a stretcher to protect her. He asked if her father had told her anything before the accident because he suspected the killer was searching for something her father might have left behind. Rose said Danny was hurting her with his hands, and Danny quickly apologized, realizing he had been gripping her shoulders without noticing. Miyari then intervened, ordering Inui and Danny to leave the room immediately. Inui tried to convince her that it was his job, but she pushed him out without listening. Outside the room, Inui dried his gun to prevent rust, while Danny apologized for Rose's suspicious behavior toward stretchers. Inui replied that he was used to it because of his face. Meanwhile, strange light beams appeared, and Inui immediately noticed them, saying, "It seems the target has appeared." Inui ran toward the source of the light. On the other side, Rose calmed down and lay in her bed, while Miyari sat nearby. Miyari introduced herself as an engineer specializing in stretchers, and a friend of the large stretcher Rose had just met. Rose got up and ordered Miyari to leave, saying she didn't know what Danny had told them, but she wouldn't undergo undergo any stretching procedure. Miari calmly explained that, given Rosé's condition, she probably couldn't bathe properly and assured Rosé of her experience in caring for patients. On the other side, Inui was being chased by a disembodied artificial hand. The hand wrapped itself around him until Inui grabbed it and asked who it belonged to. In Rosé's room, Miari gently cleaned Rosé's body with water and asked if Rosé hated stretchers. Miari explained that some people were naturally drawn to power and might become criminals after stretching, while others underwent stretching just to survive. Rosé said she couldn't believe someone would choose such a form just to survive. Rosé then mentioned that during the accident, a stretcher's hand had pierced the windshield of her car. She was certain about what she saw because her father's job had made stretchers hate him. Miari understood and said she could see why Rosé's father, being part of the Ministry of Justice, would make stretchers resentful. Suddenly, Miari gasped in amazement at a picture of Rosé on a motorcycle and asked about it. Rosé said it was her father's motorcycle, and Miari marveled that only 5 of that model, the Gustaf 360 MV, were produced during the war. Miari then began listing the bike's impressive specifications, but quickly realized she was rambling and apologized. Rosé told Miari that the bike was in storage and she could do whatever she wanted with it. Miari excitedly asked if Rosé was serious, and Rosé replied hopelessly that she couldn't use it anyway. Miari then noticed that Rosé was constantly fidgeting with her necklace and asked if it was special. Rosé explained that her father had given it to her during the accident and wondered why he had given her such a gift. At that moment, Danny burst into the room, saying the killer was there. Miari quickly covered Rosé's body and scolded Danny for barging in so rudely. Danny said there was no time for such talk and that they needed to leave to a safe place while Inui dealt with the killer. Danny immediately picked up Rosé and started to leave, but Miari warned him to be careful with Rosé. Danny ignored her and kept moving. Inui then suddenly blocked their path and asked Danny if he was crazy for being so relaxed after supposedly eliminating the killer. At that moment, the disembodied hand reappeared. Rosé screamed in fear, recognizing it as the same hand she had seen during the accident. Miari said it was impossible for a stretcher to exist with just hands. Rosé asked Inui why the shadowy figure's hand was with him. Inui replied that he would now reveal the true identity of the shadow. Inui pointed to Danny and asked why he had created fake footprints to convince Rosé that there was a killer searching for something her father had left for her. Inui then approached Rosé's bed, revealed a hidden listening device that Danny had placed in a photo frame, and accused Danny of failing to protect Rosé and leaving her alone all the time. Inui demanded that Danny hand Rosé over, saying it was for Danny's own good. Rosé refused to believe Inui, saying stretchers only aimed to harm people and were no longer human because they had become monsters. Danny took advantage of Rosé's trust in him and left with her, ignoring Miari's calls. In the car, Danny told Rosé he was glad she had believed him and come with him. Rosé replied that she had hoped what she had heard was a lie but was now suspicious of him. She then pointed a gun at the back of his head. Danny noticed the necklace swinging around Rosé's neck in the rearview mirror and realized it was the object George had left behind. He explained that he had placed the listening device in her room to find the location of the item. Danny said he and George had been working for justice, but had faced a huge enemy, the Periorn Company, which overshadowed the entire city. He said George had collected data proving the dangers of stretchers, which could be used to take down the company. Rosé asked if the necklace was what would crush the stretchers, and wondered why her father had involved her in such danger, especially since it was related to their shared work. Danny said he didn't know why George had involved Rosé either. Suddenly, Danny stopped the car, causing Rosé to lose her balance and fall onto the seat. Danny took the gun and said he didn't know how George had obtained the data but called him a coward for refusing to use it. He had planned to flee the country with his family instead of handing the data to Spitsbergen, which would have eliminated the stretchers and earned them a lot of money. Danny loaded the gun and told Rosé, who was now scared, that her father's mistake was why he had to act. Rosé asked if Danny was the killer, and he replied yes, but said the disembodied hand had unexpectedly been protecting her since the accident. He had brought Inui in to help. Rosé thought to herself that she was truly foolish. Danny raised the gun to ensure Rosé's death, but the disembodied hand attacked him, foiling his plan. Danny exclaimed that it was impossible for the hand to have been hiding in the car. On the other side, Miari and Inui were on their way to chase Danny. They soon arrived, and Inui shot at the car, causing Danny to lose control and stop. Inui stood in front of Danny and said he would complete his mission to protect the young lady from the shadow. Inui punched Danny and asked who would pay his wages now. Later, Russo from the security office arrived and told Inui he was sure the anti-stretching office would take over the case after a thorough investigation. However, he needed Inui's help to investigate the death of Rosé's family. Meanwhile, Miari shouted at Inui, saying she had solved the mystery of the necklace. It looked like an old storage device. Inui said he would take the data as his reward. Rosé apologized to Inui for her earlier harsh words, but Inui said he was only interested in exorcising evil spirits. He then left. Miari asked Rosé to call her if she ever wanted any stretching done, assuring her of her logo's promise, safety, and good looks. Miari then ran after Inui, asking him to wait for her.